Hello, everyone. I think we're up and running now. It seems this event has become even more international since Monday. Some of you are online from Belgium, from England, Ireland, Italy, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Peru, the Philippines, Portugal, Puerto Rico, Serbia, Spain, Switzerland, and Zambia. So it's good afternoon again to most of you and good morning or good evening to the rest. It's fantastic to have you here. Big welcome to you all. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, and again, my apologies for the technological glitch that blocked out quite a few of you in the last session. My name's Peter Christoff. I'm the convener of the Great Ocean Road Communities Network, or GORCN, and I'll be moderating the second session of our 5-part series on Tourism Reimagined and the Great Ocean Road. I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Peoples, their custodianship of this country over many millennia, and their cultural wealth and generosity and depth of insight into this continent. And I specifically want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung from whose land I'm joining this webinar. I want to pay my respects to their elders past and present and offer my respects to any Indigenous folk who are online today. Now, please bear with me while I repeat a couple of things from my introduction in the first session for those who missed it. I promise I won't do this at every webinar. The Great Ocean Road Communities Network, which I convene with its 23 member groups, was formed in 2022 to provide an effective public voice on social, environmental and economic issues of importance to the region. Issues like coastal management, bushfires, climate change's growing impacts, and of course, tourism. And we've combined to create a strong advocate for all of the communities and all stakeholders along the road, while also protecting diverse and distinctive characteristics of those communities. The Great Ocean Road's been identified as an exceptionally beautiful region of national, indeed international importance. Those of you who are overseas, come and visit. Tourism to it has been of significant educational and economic value, but our communities are now questioning if the swelling tide of visitations to the region, both local and through international tourism, has gone beyond sustainable limits and is now out of control. And so this webinar series is intended to help us better understand the drivers and the pressures that propel industrial tourism and to consider the ways in which its current practice impacting the Great Ocean Road region. It's intended to explore alternative forms of regenerative and sustainable tourism, drawing on valuable insights and experiences and thinking for the realisation of such a transition for the Great Ocean Road. Thirdly, the series is intended to enable us to hear from Victoria's public agencies about what strategies and processes currently govern our region, what tourism governance is working, how it's working, what the problems are, and the responses to and plans for regenerative tourism. And lastly, it's to enable us to engage these policymakers and our various communities and stakeholders in an ongoing discussion that focuses on identifying potentials for change and for co-designing regenerative tourism alternatives for our region. In our first webinar on Monday, Anna Pollock laid bare her analysis of global issues that current tourism practices raise. She indicated, with the conversion of experiences into commodities, places into destinations, travellers into consumers, and with visitations as the main marker of success, that tourism has grown exponentially. It's been enhanced by increasing affluence and cheaper travel, slicker marketing and other forms of technological facilitation. It's come to be seen by many as a right, not a privilege. Income from it has encouraged corporate and political greed. And tourism in this mode is short-termist, large-scale, industrial, extractive and destructive. And my analogy for it is strip mining. Anna indicated, globally where it's occurred, that such tourism has been poorly planned and often poorly regulated. It's caused overcrowding and cultural clashes, waste and pollution, water shortages in some places, strain on public infrastructure and services, a decline in the attractiveness of the sites concerned, and a deterioration in the quality of life for local residents and for local species and ecosystems. It's only had secondary regard for cultural sensitivities, local needs, and environmental conservation. And Karina De Chiere of the Kennet River Association on Monday gave us a very tightly focused look at some of the very localised impacts of such practices at Kennet River and along the Great Ocean Road. Anna rightly indicated that such tourism cannot, for many reasons to do with physical, environmental and social limits, be sustained indefinitely. And so she then began to frame a discussion about sustainable tourism alternatives, ones that recognise the holistic nature of the places visited, diversified tourism with strong local input and control over enterprises and impacts, and with a value on values that are not primarily commercial. Today, we'll extend and deepen this consideration of alternative, resilient and regenerative tourism practices. So what I want to do now is introduce both speakers, today's speakers, together. We'll hear from them both, one after another, something we couldn't do at the first session. And this will be followed with about half an hour, I think, of question and answer. Can I just suggest questions, please, via the chat function? Get in early. It's pretty hard to manage them if they all come in at the end of the session. And lastly, can I also suggest that you please keep your microphones and cameras off for the duration. Let me introduce our two fantastic speakers. We've really been extraordinarily privileged in this entire enterprise. First will be Dianne Dredge. Dr. Dianne Dredge is the founder and regenerative practitioner lead at the TourismCoLab, a global online education community offering courses in regenerative thinking and practice. She's an ex-professor with over 20 years' experience in researching and teaching in tourism policy in Australia, Mexico, and the Nordic countries. Dianne has completed projects for the OECD and the European Commission and has published over 200 papers and 8 books. Her greatest passion and joy, however, is working directly with communities, sitting in messy places, coaching and mentoring the real change makers and experts on what she calls her practice grounds. Our second speaker will be Lizzie Corke OAM, who is the CEO and co-founder of the Conservation Ecology Centre, or CEC, working towards a healthy and resilient Otways landscape. The CEC is a leader in nature-positive community initiatives, focusing on applied research for biodiversity conservation by actively collaborating with traditional owners, land managers, researchers and local communities to build effective and sustainable conservation strategies. In 2021, CEC opened Wildlife Wonders, an ecotourism attraction at Apollo Bay, recognised by National Geographic Travel as one of the best places in the world to experience nature. So we're going to be privileged to hear from both of these speakers. And at this point, Dianne, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Peter. Let me just share my slides here. Awesome. I think that you can see that now. Hi, everyone. And thank you for that absolutely fantastic summary that you provided, Peter. I think that both Anna and Corinna really have set the scene, and there was a real clarion call for some new thinking to happen in this space, and I'm just really excited to be able to present to you today. So I would also like to just start by acknowledging the Indigenous first owners of the lands that I'm coming from today, which are the Wadawurrung people. I'm coming to you from Geelong today, but I'm heading off to Palawa country to Tasmania tomorrow. So I really would like to honour the deep knowledge about land management and connection to nature and how important that it is for us in moving forward. So today, Peter's set a really big challenge, and for me, it's to kind of expand on the presentations that you heard earlier in the week, but also to dig a little bit deeper and to share with you some of the experiences that I've had, some of the knowledge that I've gained, some of the examples that I'm actually working on, and some of the learnings and insights from the communities that I work with. And I would like to just say that in many ways, I'm no expert here. I'm somebody that loves to learn, and I'm always engaged in that learning process. And I have learnt so much from the communities that I work with. And indeed, I do believe that they are the change makers and the rule breakers and the care holders of the future. So for me, I really want to honour today all of those people who give me this energy to continue this work. So in preparation for this session today, I actually wrote 2 blog posts. Yes, I'm a little bit verbose and I had to write 2 because it was too long for one. But there's 3 posts that I would really point you to in terms of getting some background and some thinking. I don't want to go over those posts today, but indeed they do provide a really nice bridge between Anna's really big thinking, global thinking about what the challenges are, and how I take those forward into my practice grounds. So those 3 posts, I'll just point you in those directions. But before we start, what I would like to do is for us to actually just get out of our heads a little bit and to really just take a few deep breaths. And I'm not going to go through a presencing exercise here, but I would like you to just really take a few deep breaths and really relax your shoulders, relax into your seat, because it's when we are relaxed, we can actually hear and engage with information that we are receiving in a different way. If we're always focused in our heads, we are always looking for the solutions. We're looking for what we need to do. We're looking for the templates, the plans. But if we actually can sit back and be present and still, and to really sit in this mess, we will actually start to see an emerging pathway and a different way of understanding, and perhaps even to understand how other people are thinking. So I like to think about it in terms of the power of stillness, the power of sensing what's going on beyond the data, beyond the facts. What is it that you know from head, heart, and gut? What is it that you know through the power of connection to place? And that's where the lived experience and local knowledge of our communities who are actually grappling with these issues. It's that power of connection and what they can teach us. This power of place is very energizing, and we need to actually be still and sense that and understand what place is. It's not actually a commodity, as Anna suggested, but place is actually something much deeper. It's where we belong. It's an interconnection of our bioregional ecological functioning in and the sociological networks that we have in place. It's about that power of belonging when you start to really connect. And it's ultimately the power of potential. The power we have when we're connected to place and in our communities is extraordinary. And I think one of the key messages that Anna was trying to really explain was that we have been disconnected from this potential. So a lot of the way that I work is really trying to get back into a different way of thinking. So just as I go through, just relax and you just listen. And I think the other thing that I'd like to do is point out when you hear something that you immediately reject or you don't like, there might be some things that I say that might be provocative. Lean into that, because that is actually a site of discomfort, and the discomfort is because you are not in alignment. It's either because it's not aligned with your values or you don't understand. But what I really want you to do is actually to think about what that's bringing up for you, because it is in this discomfort and the way that we extend ourselves into that discomfort is a site of incredible learning. So my goal here today is really, my call to action, I suppose, is 4 things that I would like you to think about, and I'll come back to these at the end. Firstly, one of the things that we need to really do if we're going to address over-tourism and understand the systems change and the mindset shift that we need is we have to raise our level of conscious awareness of our connection to the community, connection to place, and connection to this planet and all of the ecological systems that are sustaining life. Because if we're not conscious of those larger networks of energy that is maintaining our living system, we're working against it. So I want you to, just think about how we raise our level of consciousness. I'd like to think about how we reframe government, business, community, nature relationships. And I put re in capital letters at the front because often we talk about reframing, we talk about reimagining, but at the end of the day, we have to understand what our frame is to be able to reframe. We need to be able to understand what imagination is to be able to reimagine. And a lot of the time, we really don't lean in to what that direction is telling us. So I want you to think about reframing government, business, community, and nature relations. Third thing is that we need to reimagine policy with different goals. And I'll put it to you today that unless we do this, we're going to become very much out of kilter with a lot of directions that are currently going on overseas. And finally, I want to introduce the idea of activating careholders. So instead of shareholders, let's think about the people in local communities as the careholders, the stewards of the places that we value and that we care about. And so really rethinking that notion of careholder as opposed to stakeholder. So Anna set up a really fabulous a platform for us to start thinking here. We often talk immediately, we start to talk about climate change and biodiversity loss, which are really the two key issues that we have related to the meta crisis. The meta crisis is so much more, but climate change and biodiversity loss are really the two things that are really challenging us at the moment. And a lot of people care about this. So unless you, if you haven't read the two posts, one of the posts actually does give you some information about the fact that the Great Ocean Road is actually nominated as one of the highest risk tourism assets that Australia has due to climate change and all of the climate perils that have been identified that not only will it affect the physical location, the roads, the infrastructure, the natural environment, but the impacts that start to unfold in terms of climate change will also affect all of the communities that are dependent on tourism. So there's a great vulnerability there that doesn't seem to be talked about all that often. Anna talked about this over-reliance on tourism and this economic and social structuring that I think does not get enough attention. So globally, we know that our economies and our social networks are restructuring. Our relationship to work is changing. There is less full-time career potential in any sector. There's a lot more gig economy work in every sector. So even just those little things that I've mentioned, economic and social restructuring means that what we have enjoyed in the past is not going to be what our future looks like. And this means that our communities, especially communities that are reliant on tourism, and businesses as well, especially small, place-based, seasonal micro businesses, very vulnerable to these economic and social changes. We have this situation, as Anna, explained very well, that tourism is extracting, and there's no mandate, there's no interest, there's no talk about how we actually reinvest back into the places that are supporting tourism. And of course, I'm going to offer this kind of idea that there's a policy blindness, that the current system is no longer fit for purpose, and it will become increasingly in tension with what communities care about. And what we're actually seeing across Australia and internationally is an increasing number of increasing number of tourists, an increasing number of communities that are looking for a different way of doing things. And it's not that they want to work with tourism differently, they're just turning their back on what the existing system is and they're going it their own way because it doesn't make sense for them. So this kind of splintering and split is a really interesting thing that's going to continue to happen. And again, if any of this is making you feel uncomfortable, lean into it and figure out why it's making you uncomfortable. So I've worked for it's almost getting close to 30 years now with many, many communities all around the world. And it's either been over tourism or under tourism or how to manage tourism. But I think there's 6 patterns that I think are pretty much standard to all of the communities that I've been working with. The first is there's an exploitation of common pool resources. And common pool resources, if you don't know, are those resources that are either in public ownership or they're owned by no one. So the air, the water, they're not necessarily owned by anyone. They might be managed by the public sector, but they're not owned. So, and then we've got the public resources, which are, infrastructure and parks and things like that. Tourism tends to see these resources as things to exploit. And as I've written in the blog post, they're actually resources that are there to be accessed and to be monetised. And so the role of government policy is actually to help businesses monetise those common pool resources. But of course, local communities in place care about these resources. They are the careholders. They want to steward these resources. So it's little wonder that there are a range of conflicts starting to emerge around that area. Well, not starting to emerge, it's quite common. The dominance of industry policy goals, I won't go into that because Anna talked about that so well. The myth of universal benefits, I think this is a really interesting one. I often get the response when I'm talking to operators, for example, who say, but I've got eco accreditation and the community will benefit anyway. And when I ask, well, how does the community benefit? Well, I've got eco accreditation. And so there's a gap there between actually being able to describe how the community will benefit and what are you doing to actually ensure that the community is benefiting, to ensure that nature is benefiting, and just using that parrot line. I think, ever since, we set up the current kind of policy direction we set up in the late 1980s, and it's been copied all across Australia and indeed across the world, this myth that there's universal benefits to be gained or there's the invisible hand of capitalism. I won't go into that, but, it will solve itself once the impacts become so great that it starts to impact upon profitability or the production of those experiences. So the myth of universal benefits, let's actually really get down and explore that one and get deeper. The fourth one is about place identity. So who has the right to actually define how a place is marketed, how a place is projected to the world, and what kind of visitors are attracted as a result? And I think that in the vast majority of communities that I've been working with over the last couple of decades, this is a question that they ask privately. And I think it's starting to become increasingly a public question. Who has the right? Is it a marketing company from Sydney or from, Melbourne that has a right to define what my community wants to be known for? And this is about sense of place, attachment and stewardship of home. And this tension has now started to really fester in a lot of places. And this is also about the lack of social license. So who actually understands what social license is? We need a lot more literacy in how to establish social license, how to work with communities and work with nature so that there is a social license from the tourism industry to actually operate. I find that there's a real lack of literacy around what social license is and how it can be developed. And I've even had, in one community, I had some members from a an industry association. So what is this social license? Where can I buy it? Like, what forms do I need to fill out? And it's not that kind of social license. So that's how much we have to really dig down deep and understand that social license is actually the support that community and nature gives so that tourism can exist in that place. So it's a two-way thing. And finally, it's about just intersection between tourism and these broader place-based challenges. So increasingly, issues of housing affordability and availability, impacts on environment, impacts on cost of living, impacts on the amenity of local communities. All of these are issues that start to intersect with tourism, and yet the way that we deal with tourism is usually in that silo, and those issues happen to be the responsibility of other organisations, principally local government or something like that. So those 6 patterns have really underpinned the rise of over-tourism. And I think one thing, and this is a very timely example of just a couple of those, because this is a post time out. It's just recent. It was last week. And the way that it is described, the Great Ocean Road is described, Victoria is home to almost 2,000 kilometres of killer coastline, and it's dotted with dozens of seaside towns, villages and hamlets. So here, somebody is, allowing this kind of projection of the Great Ocean Road and all of those communities as being open to tourism, open to being visited. But where is the social license here? I'm just raising that not as a mechanism to criticise, but really, who has the right to marketplace, and how is that place projected, and what are the kinds of visitors that are coming as a result of these kinds of posts? So it is something that we talk about a lot in the communities that I work with, is the challenge of these top 10 posts, the best beaches or the best communities or the best experiences. These are not normally done in communication with communities. And as a result, it's a huge tension point for local communities. So I don't want to, I've been a policy person. I've written policy. I've given advice for policy. But I think what's happening is that there is this division, because the way policy is actually written, policy is written as a relationship between big business and government. In the post, I talk about the fact that, the vast majority of tourism is made up of small, medium, micro, seasonal enterprise and not-for-profit groups, community groups, who don't really get a seat at the table, who don't really have their voice heard. But what is heard is how to do tourism. So and we've set it up in a way that the legislation that sets up state organisations or sets up the roles and responsibilities all pushes forward with the idea of jobs and growth and that exploitative model. But it also doesn't allow, because it's an industry policy, it doesn't allow for communities to be heard. Communities are only heard in the relationship that communities are a resource to be used for the production of tourism. So there's no real mandate, in fact, in most states across Australia and internationally for governments to actually take into account community sentiment. And indeed, it's much more than community sentiment. It's much more about belonging and stewardship. So what we're actually getting here, and, I see it all the time, and I don't mean to take it out on policymakers, but I feel that we need to do better in terms of really engaging in this space. So, it's a lot of the responses that I hear is, well, I don't know how to do community engagement. It's not relevant to us because we need to look after the mandate that we've got in our legislation. We don't understand, we don't care, we don't have a mandate to listen to community. And I think one other thing that's really emerging recently is the idea that we can market solutions. So when you only have a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. And so we're hitting every single problem that we have with a marketing solution because marketing is the dominant mindset. Again, not taking it away, but we really need to think about what is the toolkit that we've got available. And I'll go into that in a little bit in more detail in a moment. But essentially, we need to really think about not recognising what regenerative greenwashing is and try not to market regenerative solutions. We need to see what's actually happening. Oh, gosh. I've got so much to say. So living systems in practice, we work a lot with living systems because instead of, the basic fundamental belief is that if we cannot put living systems as the primary goal underpinning our businesses, our organisations, our communities, if we can't put, the protection and the resilience of our local living systems as the centre of our practice, then we are really adopting a policy of extermination at the end of the day. We really need to think about how living systems are holistic. They respect, they're very reciprocal in the way that they take and they give back. Everybody is a careholder who has a relationship. It's about the potential of place, so that deep engagement with the sense of place, with the potential of individuals to actually have a role and be part of and be heard in the community. And it's about how we transform very dynamically. In terms of evolution, it's about respecting the cycles of life and indeed the rhythms of life, the seasonality. It's about innovating and adapting in small ways every single day in every way we can, rather than having fixed solutions. It's about always learning, having that learning mindset and learning from those sites that are making you feel uncomfortable and those different perspectives that are really trying to teach you something. And change happens in the flows. It doesn't happen in a plan. It doesn't happen in a destination management plan. It doesn't happen in a marketing framework. Change happens in the flow of information, in resources, and in the energy that happens. And what I've seen in the communities that I work with is that when the energy starts to happen, the solutions flow. And I've really not got a lot of time to do this, but I really wanted to talk about some of the learnings that I've got. So I work for an organisation that's currently defunded by the cancellation of US aid, but the local 2030 network has been working with regenerative tourism, where the community of practice leads for that. And we work with islands across the world on what is regenerative tourism on those islands. Hawaii is this incredible example. So it started with the Aina Aloha Economic Futures Framework, which was a framework which was led by native Hawaiian leaders during COVID. And they started to have a conversation about what tourism could be. And if you're talking about an over-touristed island or an over-touristed site, then this is a fantastic example of how they took small steps going forward. So they developed, it took a while, but they've actually got the first regenerative tourism bill, 2024, and it sets out the responsibility of the Hawaiian Tourism Association to actually lead with regenerative principles, which are set out in the legislation. It helps to develop the support of community groups. So it's not just about funding the Hawaiian Tourism Association, but how can they support and develop community groups who are working with environmental education and environmental projects, as well as community projects, as well as protecting local cultures. They also have a really interesting nascent curator, it's called. It is a kind of regenerative, locally developed accreditation. I use in a light way because it's really a learning platform and a way of getting different businesses in tourism to understand what regenerative tourism is. And so it's locally based and it's developed on Hawaiian principles. An amazing example. The next example is I'm so inspired by Tyson Lopez from the Aruba Conservation Foundation. So during COVID, Tyson and his team decided that the Parks Association, which was part of the government, could not continue to implement government policy which was against nature. They found that there was a real division. So he decided to actually reframe the organisation as a conservation foundation. So remove it from the government so that it could actually put nature at the centre and make nature its client. So this is an incredible transformation of a government agency to become something that opens itself up to philanthropy and to different stakeholders and to putting nature at the centre. Very inspiring. And there's a couple of,
I'll deal with myself, thank you, in a minute.
They are, this is just some ideas about how they are actually reframing their relationship with nature. So sky above us, earth below us, nature within us. It's still, if you didn't know, Aruba has a very, very high concentration of tourism. It is a very dependent economy on tourism, and it suffers from over-tourism as well. So it's another great example of where an organisation has actually managed to shift its goals and therefore the way that it relates to all of its partners. Regenerative Vanua is an organisation that I partner with and incredibly inspiring as well. They believe that every visitor should receive an education about what is Vanua and how to show up and be a good visitor. So it's not just some guidelines or, signs. It is a proper education program for anybody who wants to visit some of these islands. They need to actually really think about it seriously and commit to being a good visitor and giving back and being regenerative. Again, the organisation partners with other similar organisations to actually amplify its values. So it's actually working with the Returning, which is an Indigenous corporation in Bundjalung country in northern New South Wales. They share knowledge. And I think what's really interesting here is that when we see the incredible partnership that's going on there, the people in Byron Bay are like, we want to be part of this. When can we visit, Vanuatu? So there is a kind of a sense of needing and wanting to work differently just from showing up in this different way. I'm going very fast here because I know that I don't have much time, but one of the most incredibly inspiring communities I have worked with is on Flinders Island, and you may have heard of the Regenerative Living Lab that we started in 2021 because the mayor, so this is an example of a really courageous mayor who stood up and said, I don't know what a regenerative living lab is, but I think we need one because we need a different relationship with tourism. And of course, tourism on Flinders Island is very different to over-tourism on the Great Ocean Road. But over-tourism is a perception. It's a perception that impacts on people's well-being, their mental health, their connection in the community, their sense of pride and confidence and courage to go out every day. So it was in this situation of over-tourism, even though there weren't, if you compared it to the Great Ocean Road, it wouldn't have that many. So the way that this is really rolled out, again, far too complex. I could do a whole webinar on this, but we started with this regenerative living lab and asking the community. So it was all driven by the community. And honestly, the community would have thrown rotten tomatoes and eggs at us had they have had them in their pockets when we first met them. But it took 2 years for us to gain their confidence and to be able to co-create several projects that they could use moving forward that meant that they could use tourism to actually improve what was happening on the island in terms of circular economy, visitor experiences, and just ecologizing the business network. So we started with this 2-year project. We have actually got now another tranche of funding moving forward. So we've established the Furno Collective, which is a group of islanders who are actually taking this project forward. For us, it was really important that we didn't own it going into the future. So it's become something that is owned by the community, and the community is their voice. And they have decided that they would like to be responsible for how they show up and how they're marketed. And I draw your attention to Regenerosity, which is the event that they're having every 2 years. They have a Furno Futures Forum, and that forum discusses the future, and they do little TED Talks, relating to what they do on the island and, the impact of their businesses. And so there's a whole lot of different activities going on that reinforce regeneration. And I will say that the word regeneration is not well liked. I understand that. But the islanders really understand what it is in terms of lived experience. So we need to just find the language that's available to us so that we can actually work in this way, in a way that makes sense to local communities, taking their lead and meeting them where they're at. So in terms of community engagement, as I said, took 2 years, but it had a life of its own, which was extraordinary. So as we started to do the community engagement to find out what the future of tourism on the island looked like and what kind of relationship they wanted to have, the arts group said, well, we don't actually trust what you're doing because you're consultants from away. And so what happened is the arts group decided that they would actually do their own community engagement. So they had a month-long installation where people were invited in to do their own artwork and to show up and say how they related to tourism, what were their issues, etc. And I think what was really interesting here is that when visitors attended the art gallery during this period, they initially said, oh, are we allowed? And then when they came in, they actually started to think a lot more about their own behaviour and what they'd seen and how they could be better visitors to the island. And as one of our collaborators said, well, we want the kind of visitors that are happy to help with the washing up after the meal, but not to leave with the silver when they're out the door. And I think that really summed it up. We worked with the Yarra River Reserve Catchment Management. So this is another opportunity to actually get alternative voices. So the Upper Yarra River Reserve Catchment Committee of Management, I struggle with that name. Basically, they asked the question, what would the river say if it had a voice? So their whole work is around cleaning up the river and revegetating the river and managing the riverbank. And they really were concerned about the kind of visitors that were unaligned with the values of the river and were leaving rubbish and were just treating it as a day trip destination without really engaging in what was an important resource for all of Melbourne, really. So having these community dialogues and actually producing a report like this meant that they now have an advocacy document and they now have a voice that they can easily put into policy. This will be my final. I really wanted to also say, look, you have the most amazing float community, or the community in East Gippsland, or I should say Lakes Entrance. So float is actually a cooperative or a social enterprise that started as a result of trying to give voice and a means of economic well-being to local artists and environmentalists. But once you start to build this incredible network and you have a space that's activated, what has happened there is that there is a kind of a welcome of vibrancy. They have a place called the Slipway, and visitors just drop in. It's almost become an alternative to the Visitor Information Centre, which sits out at the beginning of Lakes Entrance. But when you're in Lakes Entrance and you drop into this float or this slipway, what you end up with is this welcome, this hospitality that Anna mentioned the other day, is that it's second to none, because these people are saying, explore the environment my way. Come and see what I see through the art that I do. And so there's this connection between visitors and the community, which really is very, very transformational. And this has grown over the last 10 or 15 years, really. And there is so much here in terms of visitor experiences that are ground up, led by artists, led by locals. The stories are shared. The welcome, the hospitality is second to none. Look, I'm just going to jump over that because you can read the one about Vancouver Island in the blog post. But I wanted to just draw out really quickly this final couple of slides. So we have a toolkit. We've had this toolkit for a long time. In fact, I was writing about this toolkit in 2002. It's in a textbook in 2006. But when we only have a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail, right? And this is what I'm saying here, is that if you only have eco-certification, then every problem looks like eco-certification. If you only have signage, then every problem looks like you can put a sign there to teach people. But we have this incredible toolkit, and we need the literacy to be able to use this toolkit. But when I wrote this in 2002, I was really coming from this scientific mindset and thinking about all of these things that we could do, from voluntary to financial incentives, government action, legal mechanisms. But where I've got to now, after the last 10 years of my practice, is that we have two sides. The science and the rationality and all of that toolkit exists on one side, but we actually also have access to what we are learning from the inside. So our conscious awareness of living on this planet in nature, with nature, sustained by nature and our communities, we need to actually develop another toolkit around being conscious and aware and develop our humanness. And if you turn that on the side, it's about inner development. So our next level of development is to really grapple with what we don't understand, how we think, and how we show up in the world. So there's the external and the internal. So I feel that we have a kind of a conceptual expansion that we need to lean into if we're going to solve some of these problems. So this call to action that I started with is really about raising our level of consciousness. So really thinking about how we think, why we think that way, and how we can think differently. We need to reframe, and instead of it being just government and business relations, we need to actually also insert community and nature relations, because it's the only way that we will get a holistic approach to the future of tourism. We need to reimagine policy with different end goals. And I put to you that if we adopt living systems, and I teach a course on how to implement living systems principles in your business. We need to get rid of business plans that say this is profit and growth and say we are going to now work towards living systems, economic, social, and ecological, and embed all three and shift our thinking. It can be done, and we're doing it. And finally, we need to activate the care holders. They're the people in the communities that are actually doing it. So with that, I'm just going to share with you what you can do. And I really don't like this end slide, to be quite honest, because I hate the idea of giving you a checklist of solutions, because I've just told you that we need to think before we actually come up with solutions. But I think from my experience, we need to build our networked communities, communities of communities, network communities that are sharing this way of working so that we can work together. We need to activate the potential of place. We need to honour the lived experience and local knowledge that exists in that place instead of imposing solutions on them. We need to do community futures exercises and, lean into what the community wants for their future. Develop your story. And I point you to the story of Flinders Island. And one of the things is that don't change this place, let this place change you. I think that really sums it up. Reclaim your voice. And we heard a lot about advocacy, but it's more than advocacy. We need to also learn how to speak up and to just be loud and proud and courageous. When we talk about advocacy, often we're giving the power to others, but we also need to reclaim our voice in that. And then finally, don't look for solutions. Please don't look for solutions. Look for creative thinkers. Look for energy. Look for flows of information and energy and resources that will help sustain this journey ahead. And I'm going to stop there. So thank you. And over to you, Peter.
Dianne, that was absolutely extraordinary. Thank you so much for that. As I said, we're going to go straight on to our next speaker and then come back to questions. I've been picking up a few questions on the way, but I really am very keen. If you have questions to ask, please come and drop them into the chat. Now's the time to do it. So without further ado, Dianne, thank you. That's brilliant. And there's a lot there, which I think we're going to chew over. But now, Lizzie Corke, who is the CEO and co-founder of the Conservation Ecology Centre, over to you.
Unmute myself. Thank you ever so much for having me. It's so lovely to be with you. I'm just trying to get this presentation sharing. Sorry, I have to move all of you over. There we go. Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
We hope so. It's beautiful.
Fabulous. That's wonderful. Well, today I'll be speaking predominantly about our work on Gadigal country. But I'm joining you today from Wurundjeri country up in Melbourne. And so I acknowledge both of these people as the traditional owners of these places and pay my respects to elders past and present. Anna and Dianne have both spoken about the need for a fundamental mind shift. And they've told us that we can only find the solutions by changing the thinking that caused the problems in the first place. We saw the dire need for this in Karina's presentation about Kennet River. But I'm reminded of a phrase that I've heard from local elders lots and lots of times when talking about it, where to from here. And that phrase is remembering the future. Many of us on this call are visitors, and regenerative thinking is not new. It served this country incredibly well for millennia. And I thank our Aboriginal friends and colleagues for their immense patience as we try to catch up. So Wildlife Wonders is an ecotourism attraction that opened almost exactly 4 years ago, but its genesis was much earlier than that here. This is the Conservation Ecology Centre. It's an organisation that's been around for 25 years, and our vision is a healthy and resilient Otways landscape nurtured forever. The centre, which is here, is located at Cape Otway alongside the Great Otway National Park. It's from this base in Gadabunod country that we work across Gadabunod country through Goolagin and Kuro-Warren country and right across the Maar Nation into Wadda-Warren country to the east. And our work looks like this. Ecologists gathering and analysing data, trying to fill the key knowledge gaps, working with our partners to apply that knowledge to better care for country and have better conservation outcomes. So these are our strategic priorities. I won't go into detail here, but I think it's important background. It's about learning from country, caring for country, creating a caring community, and all of that underpinned by a strong organisation. So like all good organisations, we're always thinking about, a little bit to the side. We're always thinking about threats and the challenges and considering ways in which we can address them or redirect them. So these are some of the regional challenges that we've identified over the years. We're in the midst of an absolute biodiversity crisis, and one of the big challenges for addressing that is very limited funding availability. It's always short-term funding cycles. There's never enough to do the work that you need to do, and there's absolutely no continuity. We're in a place with very high volume visitation, but there's very limited curation or visitor education available, and there's very limited availability of visitor facilities. We all know about that. There's also extremely limited visitor spend, and that's particularly because there's very limited opportunities for people to spend their money when they come to the Great Ocean Road. There's so much free opportunity, for better or worse. The result is very dangerous roadside wildlife viewing, and the scene that's on the slide here is something that we've all encountered if you come around a blind corner on the Great Ocean Road. It's terrifying. And there's very various impacts on community. Some people who do well from visitors coming and some who are absolutely just negatively impacted. The result is very increased community resistance and conflict, and that's what we're chatting about today. Overall, the whole thing results in reduced environmental health and resilience. So the opportunities, Dianne spoke about activating the potential. In this context, we explored what a little environmental NGO could do. What was it that we had? Well, we had an incredible destination. People already come here to enjoy the region's natural beauty. It is a spectacular place. We also had some extraordinary resources, both within the CEC team and in the extended CEC family, and I use that term very loosely because it includes lots and lots of really amazing people. Expertise in ecotourism, developing experiences and providing nature education. Expertise in facility development, how to best manage people in space. Extraordinary expertise in tourism marketing in the region, and sending that in really good directions. Amazing expertise in for-purpose business planning through Tanara Social Purpose. We also had an really fabulously established structure for investment of proceeds into conservation. as an environmental charity, we were already very well set up for very efficient investment of funds into conservation directly in the local region. And we had wonderful, wonderful stories to share. Our ecologists are out every single day doing the most extraordinary work and generating stories that are just beautiful for sharing. But embarking on whatever this idea might be, we had some really fixed non-negotiables. As an environmental NGO, living system principles are our specialty. And so we designed a tourism project that spoke to what we know. In terms of animal welfare, we committed to delivering the sort of project that plants and animals would have designed for themselves. It would be really locally relevant and have integrity. Visitors to Wildlife Wonders would know without doubt that they were on the Great Ocean Road. It would also be a very inclusive space. We designed a place where everyone would be welcome, regardless of mobility or other potential barriers. And there would be benefit, immediate benefit and long-term benefit for everyone. But Mother Nature would be our most important stakeholder, representing both the community and conservation in the long term. So this idea for Wildlife Wonders began to take shape. Anna used the term place-shaped solutions, and it's a term that particularly resonates for this project. It is absolutely not a zoo or a wildlife park, but a beautiful example of a thriving always ecosystem, complete with iconic local species like koalas and kangaroos, but also lesser-known species, things like potoroos and bandicoots, and species which should be here but are extinct in Victoria, such as paddy melons and eastern bettongs. They free range through lush fern gullies and coastal woodlands and through the grasslands overlooking the ocean. It's really a very, very beautiful place. And it provides education, not just education to school groups, though they are a really important market for us, but also education in every single experience. And we welcome a really broad cross-section of the community, including people born and raised on the Great Ocean Road, as well as those who are visiting for the first time, those with mobility and sensory challenges, and catering for all ages and levels of knowledge and experience. So from people excited to see their very, very first koala to highly experienced naturalists. Everyone gains something from their experience at Wildlife Wonders. And a really critically important thing, generating funds. So through this model, we provide for 100% of proceeds being invested into local conservation. So this is the solar-powered Wildlife Wonders Visitor Centre. It offers fit-for-purpose facilities, a really lovely cafe and shop, clean toilets, all important, and a really nicely laid out car park that caters for both cars and buses. We all understand how very important that is. There's also a very carefully concealed fox and cat-proof fence, which helps to keep the wildlife safe. The experience itself is very carefully conducted, with scheduled tours led by qualified guides. The animals do exactly what they want, and we control the people. So people stay on a beautifully designed path, and the animals choose whether or not to be seen. They have plenty of space and places to hide. We find that when people behave predictably, the animals have choice, which means that they feel very, very safe, which enormously increases the chances of visibility. So we have daytime tours where groups often see really elusive species like potoroos because the potoroos have chosen for that to happen, which makes the whole experience just even more special. So these are some of the big moments that people come for. But we often also find that it's some of these small moments that make the visit particularly memorable. Encountering species like this little potoroo on the right-hand side, yellow robins or tall astelia, which is an endangered species, species that they might never have heard of before their visit to Wildlife Wonders, or really special things that might be quite unexpected, like seeing the emus bathing in the pond as they enjoy a cup of coffee in the cafe, and learning about the conservation projects underway across the region at the themed field research base in the top left-hand corner. So Wildlife Wonders has achieved advanced eco-certification and social enterprise certification. It was also recognised by National Geographic Traveller as one of the most exciting nature-based destinations, which was just very, very exciting and very affirming for us. I want to talk particularly about resilience. Reimagining tourism for the region is really about resilience, how we can build it for the Great Ocean Road, and how we support and sustain healthy environment and a thriving community. There is lots of theory about this, and it's pretty overwhelming. We find that controlling what you can control is a really great place to start. So I wanted to share a bit about how we'd go about that day to day in this region as a very, very small non-government organisation. So to begin with, we have this wonderful social enterprise model. It's efficient and direct investment in place is the outcome of that model. Our team are our absolute superpower. They have the ability to deliver solutions that are locally relevant, and that they're really just absolutely incredible. Across the Conservation Ecology Centre and Wildlife Wonders, we're now one of the largest non-government employers, particularly in Apollo Bay. And we offer really fabulous career development, from internships through the CEC, where around about 120 interns have completed our program now over the last about 18 years. And it's lovely to see those interns working right throughout the sector and coming across, crossing paths in all sorts of lovely places. We also offer really wonderful first roles, things like young people starting out as dishwashers and going on to become front desk and heading off to uni and then coming back as guides, which is really special. And also our volunteers, who are incredible. The Wondersmiths come every single week and help with all sorts of work at Wildlife Wonders. Market diversity. COVID gave us all a crash course in pivoting and the importance of market diversity. Providing products and services that are of value to a local community and to international visitors, to government and to philanthropy and to business is just crucial for sustaining our work and enabling us to pivot as necessary. And collaboration and facilitation, which leads on from market diversity. We work with local partners in everything from our menus to our shop, and a huge number of services that underpin the delivery of all of our programs. And trade and marketing partnerships, which are absolutely crucial. Really important, we found, to develop relationships with partners who specialise in their own areas and develop arrangements that provide mutual benefit, all of us focusing on what it is that we each do really well.
Lizzie, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up pretty quickly.
Sure, we're very, very nearly there, Peter. I just wanted to share this slide because everything in nature is connected in a complex web of interactions. And resilience is very much based on the number of connections across an ecosystem. So while Wildlife Wonders and CEC are symbiotic in themselves, it's the connection in place with all sorts of organisations, and this is just a subset, that really is what builds strength in a community and in the way that a place operates. So just finally, we absolutely love where we live, and we feel very proud and privileged to be able to share it. We really want people to visit. We want them to have a magnificent time, and we want them to feel very connected with this place. We also want it to be the most amazing place to live. As a destination, we can work together to deliver complete visitor experiences that help community and conservation to thrive. And I think that becomes entirely achievable when we start celebrating species like potteroos as primary stakeholders. Thanks ever so much.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Lizzie. There's been so much in both of those presentations, and there are quite a number of questions that have come through. So I'm going to try and do my very best to sort of harvest some of them, and forgive me if some of them get laid to one side for the moment, but we will come back to them in a different way. One of the issues that has come up, I think, in several of the questions is how you think of community, and also the importance of community in terms of a response, a location of response to different forms of tourism. As we know, communities, in fact, are often a combination of different interests and different stakeholders. So there's a real complexity there, including a real tension sometimes between the different parts of communities that come together to try and form plans. And some of those issues are not easily resolved. So I just want to go to a couple of questions which I think sort of bring that problem of the structure of a community out, but also talk about the larger clash of interests, if you like, between different communities of interest, some of them not localised. So one question I want to go to is the one that was brought up by Neil early on about how governments are responding to different forms of demand. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit of his question. He says governments tend to separate park visitors into locals, into tourists of different sorts. Aren't they all exploiting the same resource? So are we only talking about international visitors or interstate visitors or Melburnians? And here's the punchline in his question. How do you handle equity and fairness of access for all? Dianne, you look like the person who would need that question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, I always go back to living systems, and it is about actually realising that we have communities within communities. So just the way that living systems have nested communities that support each other, we have communities of communities. So figuring out, and they're not always place-based, right? Some of them are, interest-based as well. So for me, it really comes down to deep, prolonged community engagement to actually really understand and map out those communities, but then to understand what kind of level of visitation that they might like, and to try and think about it in terms of flows. So, I often think about how destination management plans are really just about how you grow tourism in a destination. But, we've worked with places that go, well, how do we encourage flows that are different through a place? A bit like a rhizome allows different pathways through a place depending on, where it's going. And so what we really need to do is a much more complex, detailed analysis to create those different kinds of pathways. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just think that destination management plans just don't get us anywhere near that complexity of planning out and then using marketing and information to promote or not to promote, to hide destinations or, micro destinations. Anyway.
So just to follow on from that, because I think there's some really important problems and ideas in there. Of course, there'll always be the claim that local communities want to be parochial. They want to preserve what they've got. What are the parameters? What are the limits to tourism? When do we know we've hit over tourism? And of course, how do we wind things back? And I think this came through in both of your talks in different ways. I mean, what's the role of the local community then in monitoring ecological impacts, social impacts, economic impacts? And how do you get that in place in a preemptive way, in a precautionary way, so that you don't build this torrent of tourism which overruns all of those boundaries pretty quickly, indeed, if it hasn't already? Either of you.
I think that the Great Ocean Road is a really interesting example because it's such a journey. It begins in one place and it ends in another, and there's all sorts of experiences to be had along the way. And I think we, as a community and as a connected group, certainly starting to think about, but where are the best places to encourage people to stop and where are the best places not to be suggesting that people stop. So things like not having all of the buses stopping at Kennet River, but potentially other places along the Great Ocean Road that are better equipped for those buses to park and for those people to use toilets and to have a nice experience. And I think that the community has an enormous role to play in that, and how we present the Great Ocean Road and where we suggest that people go and how that all works.
And I would just add to that in terms of specifically that question about monitoring. I just love this example that you've given, Lizzie. Every business should actually be a kind of social enterprise that delivers back good to community and to nature. So if that's the case, why aren't we empowering not-for-profits and social enterprise to actually collect this data? Because we know that it's not just about community sentiment. There's lots of data, lots of lived experience, lots of stories that can actually be collected via supporting social enterprise. But social enterprise, in the scheme of things, always finds it much more difficult to survive in a competitive environment. It's always considered to be the poor cousin and doesn't get the support that more traditional profit-focused businesses do.
I just want to pick that up because there are two questions which have come through which go to the heart of what you've just said, and about the power of extractive tourism as opposed to regenerative tourism and how you deal with that. And on the one hand, there's a really good question from Suzanne about, we've learned that unlocking the potential of local places is vital as our self-organising networks. But given that extractive thinking is so embedded in all of our institutions, and that translates into the source of power, influence and resources, how do you reframe the narrative in order to enable regenerative thinking? And there's another question here which I think goes with that, and I want to put the two of them together, and this one's from Penny. In all of these examples, what we're seeing is regenerative tourism projects coming online alongside, in other words, additional to extractive tourism. So are we talking, in your case, in the examples both of you have given, of regenerative tourism projects replacing extractive tourism, or we're just simply seeing more of both types of tourism occurring, which of course then adds to the pressure? So how do you deal with the power dimension, and how do you actually have a transition from one type of tourism to another?
I think that's one for you, Dianne.
Oh, thank you.
These questions aren't going to be easy.
Yeah, look, I go back to Andrea Lane in Afloat, East Gippsland. She just says, we're doing it anyway. And that's part of the issue, is if when you always think about that power is out there and that's dominating over you, then you're always going to be looking for a way of accommodating that power. And I think that in places like Barcelona, places like Amsterdam, places like the Canaries, and they're taking the power back. And I'm not, culturally, Australia is very different, but there will be a point where people go, I don't want to do this anymore. So we've got that, and then we've got, the other end of it is that we're not going to participate. We're going to be silent, but we're not going to participate. There's all kinds of actions in between that communities can take. But I think it is actually about reframing your understanding of that power and doing it anyway. And starting small, taking small steps and working with those businesses that do get it. Because I do think that, increasingly I'm seeing a lot of businesses that I'm working with saying, you know what, I see that we have to change. I see that we have to reorient what our business model looks like. And I see that we need to ecologize our businesses or our business within the local community, because once the local community is happy, we will be happier. So I think it's going to be slow, but I do think work with those people who actually are on the page at the moment too.
So let's step out of this local frame, though I want to come back to it, and there's some good questions that drive us back into it. But there's some bigger questions about regulation and about how we shape the torrent of tourism. One from Darren and another one from Mark about marketing and regulation of marketing. For example, Darren uses the example that Google pin drops have been added to small hamlets, for instance, such as happened at Kennet River, with koala sleeping in tree, coincidentally going in front of the general store, and koala walking trails where there was no trail at all. In other words, there is, of course, in this sort of freewheeling world of social media, a whole range of devices that can be used to propel precisely the type of tourism that we don't want. So, and this is Mark's question in relation to that, who has the right to market place in a certain way, and how do you regulate that?
I think it's a really difficult one, Peter, and the beast of social media is certainly a hard one to control. We had a very interesting experience just last week. One of our most fabulous mentors has been Hobbiton from New Zealand, at how to manage groups of people in a place and give them a personalised and wonderful experience. And they've been just fabulous advisors and supporters as we've developed Wildlife Wonders. Russell, the CEO from Hobbiton, came to Wildlife Wonders last week to see it and to give his advice and fresh eyes on how things were going. And he did a lot of secret shopping around the town and popped into lots of places and said, I've got one day in Apollo Bay, where should I go? I'm really interested in wildlife. And everybody suggested that he go and look for koalas down Lighthouse Road or go to Kennet River, because that was a good place to see koalas as well. And then he pressed them a little bit more. So I'm really interested in a guided experience or something like that. And went, oh, well, you could go to Wildlife Wonders. It's really great, but there's a cost. So I think some of it comes down to just those on-ground moments of actually directing people to an experience that has a price, but will be a fabulous experience for the people and for the place, and will mean that there's investment in the region. So I think sometimes the very, very big challenges actually boil down to very, very small solutions, and lots and lots of little solutions in that sort of space. So all of those people had been to Wildlife Wonders, but it wasn't the first thing that they thought of when this person in front of them was saying, I'm interested in seeing koalas.
In fact, you'll be very pleased to hear that one of the fan mail comments for you in the chat is, we in Apollo Bay love Wildlife Wonders. We just wish it could be replicated in a whole bunch of other places. There is that issue of replication. Obviously, it can be a commercial enterprise. Should it be a joint commercial government-supported enterprise? How would you think of that? And that is the issue of regulating a market or regulating demand as well. How would you replicate your model without undermining yourself?
Oh, I think it's absolutely possible. The thing that we particularly have tried to do is be incredibly locally relevant in the smallest, closest geographical sense of local. So I think you could create different things on the same sort of model that really represent the place that they're located in. And I think that's a really exciting idea.
I'd just like to throw in there, maybe, why can't we think of, we're always thinking about where to go for the best visitor experience. Where can we go to see koalas? But should we be thinking, how do we, instead of thinking about it in terms of promoting an experience, how do we actually educate the visitor so that they can make informed decisions about what they want to support in order to be a good visitor? So instead of taking the focus away from the visitor experience, let's go and do that, to how do we be good humans in the place that is hosting us? One of the things, and I can't talk too much about it because it's not happened yet, but Flinders Island is actually developing a regenerosity app. So where can you be generous within a regenerative framework? So, and that will provide lots of information and learning around the choices that people will make.
That's really lovely, Dianne, because I think people do always want to be really good. And giving those options so that they can choose is really valuable.
Going back to an early comment that you made, Dianne, with which I absolutely agree, which is about the vulnerability of tourism, especially in the Great Ocean Road. And as you probably know, I've done a lot of work on climate change and on bushfires recently, so extremely sensitised to those issues. There is a problem, of course, of over-tourism in that you can bring too many people into a region and therefore leave them extremely vulnerable, and also bring them in using a whole range of unsustainable forms of transport. So I want to go to the transport question that's been raised here about how you actually increase the sustainability and the resilience of tourism, perhaps even reducing tourism volumes by dealing with problems of people in cars and buses. Are there other options available? Should there be an emphasis on other ways of getting tourists in and out of what is a very fragile, very limited network of transport options into the region? How do you undo over tourism or reduce vulnerability and risk in that sense? Either of you.
For me, at least, it requires some courage and some hard decisions. And I do believe in the merit of limits to change, identifying caps and that sort of thing. We can't continue to grow. This is just a basic principle of living systems. You can't grow more than the system will allow you. So I do think it actually requires a fundamental shift, and that obviously requires political courage. Yeah.
Liz?
And certainly the tourism operator licenses, there's a model that's could absolutely do with review, and that could be a really lovely way of changing things that I think even those tour operators would be really pleased about.
So the social license concept becomes something we have to talk about quite properly. Would governments have to have, again, I'm thinking about the vulnerability issue and the safety net. To what extent do governments have to engage? And this is at a higher level than individual communities. Communities are very, very differently resourced, and their resilience and their vulnerability is very different depending on size and wealth and so on. To what extent do government agencies have to come in and provide a safety net of some sort? If they're going to build up tourism, then what sort of support do they need to provide if it runs into trouble?
For me, for me, it definitely is a multi-government response that's required. And I think what happens is that everybody is still working in their silos. So the first real commitment is to rethink what is making the system just replicate itself and grow and grow and grow, and what are the agencies that need to actually be involved in this discussion, to take a whole of government approach.
Mm-hmm.
Lizzie?
Yeah, and the Great Ocean Road is such a fabulous example of this because it's 5 LGAs throughout its length, and that cohesive strategic approach is so important with all of those, the LGAs, but also all of the other agencies cooperating and knowing what each other is doing and working together for a sort of shared goal. The Great Ocean Road Strategic Framework Plan is underway, and I'm really excited to see what might be in that and how that will start pulling all of these things together. So I think it's coming, and I think we all need to be very involved in that and to get the best value out of it.
We'll come back to that in the next few sessions, I think. Dianne, any last words or comments that you want to throw into this mix?
Just that I just love the example that you've provided, Lizzie, because I just really feel that it provides a really good example of what all businesses in tourism should be doing. So, thank you. And I really acknowledge that you're living and breathing living systems without necessarily using the words or the language, but it's the base that you're coming from. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I think, and I could absolutely endorse that comment. It was terrific to have that exposed to us in this way. it would be wrong of me to close without making one quick comment on something that came through the chat, which I think is a great example of a number of issues that we've been touching on in terms of equity and rights and appropriateness. I got a quick comment from Leanne talking about her opening an Aboriginal bush tucker farm on the Great Ocean Road. And of course, the enormous responsibility that we all have for the way in which Indigenous folk along the Great Ocean Road have been integrated into or not been integrated into the tourism fabric and the economic and social fabric of our region is something that we need to pay attention to. So I just thought I'd give a little bit of a shout out to Leanne's project, and I think we need to keep our eyes open for it. Sadly, we've come to the end of this second terrific session. Dianne and Lizzie, thank you so much for your contributions. The net is narrowing, it's tightening around what actually happens in the road and along the road and in the Otways. So the third session will be one which focuses very much on current existing activities and government regulatory and other responses to the pressures of tourism as they're emerging. The third webinar is next Monday, and we also have a wonderful Indigenous example of a project along the road. But the third session on Monday, we'll be hearing from Liz Price, and I hope to see you all there. These questions we've had today and this discussion today focuses our attention precisely on what may or may not be able to occur and what we would like to occur in the Great Ocean Road region. Thank you all for attending. Thank you all for being here. And Dianne and Lizzie, thank you very much for your presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you.